Hidden crime stories. The Taylor Parker story. A Texas state trooper pulled over a car for speeding near Kalb, just south of the Oklahoma border. It was the morning of October 9, 2020. Inside the car was a young woman, visibly shaken, and in her arms, a newborn baby. She told the trooper she had just given birth on the side of the road. The baby was not breathing. Both of them were rushed to a hospital in Idabel, Oklahoma. Doctors moved fast, until something in the examination stopped them cold. Medical staff quickly determined the woman showed no signs of recent childbirth. Then they confirmed something else entirely. She did not have a uterus. She had undergone a hysterectomy years earlier. Pregnancy had not simply failed to happen for her that morning. It had been biologically impossible for years. The baby was not hers. DNA testing would soon confirm whose daughter she actually was. 20 miles away, in a quiet home in New Boston, Texas, a 21-year-old woman named Reagan Simmons-Hancock had been found dead that same morning. She was 36 weeks pregnant. Her 3-year-old daughter had been in the house when it happened. The baby in that car, a little girl who would be named Braxlynn, was Reagan's daughter. She did not survive. The woman who had taken her was named Taylor Parker, and the story of how she got to that car, on that road, claiming a stolen baby as her own, is one of the strangest and most disturbing cases of deception in modern American true crime. Because this was not a stranger who broke into a house. This was a woman who had spent months as Reagan's friend, who had photographed Reagan's wedding, who had built a relationship with her, smiled with her, talked with her about their babies due weeks apart from each other. One of those pregnancies was real. The other had never existed at all. On Hidden Crime Stories, we walk through what happened, carefully, factually, and with the respect that Reagan and Braxlynn deserve. This is a story about a lie that grew so large its creator could no longer find her way out of it, and about the young mother and unborn daughter who paid the price for that lie with their lives. Stay with me. To understand what happened on October 9, 2020, you have to go back almost a year, to a lie that started small and grew into something its creator could no longer control. Taylor Parker met a man named Wade Griffin at a Texas rodeo. He worked as a supervisor at a roofing company and also worked as a hog trapper. Parker had been through 2 marriages already by this point, both ending in divorce. She had become a mother at 17 and had a second child, a son, at 21 during her first marriage. Then, following complications from an ectopic pregnancy after a failed tubal ligation, she underwent a hysterectomy, a procedure that left her permanently unable to have more children. Throughout her second marriage, Parker had tried asking friends to serve as surrogate mothers for her, hoping to have more children despite her hysterectomy. That marriage ended in divorce in 2019. Then she met Wade Griffin, and whatever it was about this relationship, the hope of starting over, the fear of losing him, something deeper that investigators and psychologists would spend years trying to understand. Taylor Parker told him something that was not true. She told Griffin she was pregnant. She staged pregnancy announcements. She produced sonogram images. She held a gender reveal party. Parker announced her pregnancy in January 2020, just months after meeting Griffin. None of it was real. There was no baby. There could not be a baby. But Parker had built an entire performance around one, and as the months went by, the performance had nowhere to go but forward. A due date was coming. A due date that could not produce what everyone around her was expecting. This is where Reagan Simmons-Hancock enters the story, and where it becomes clear how completely unaware she was of any of it. Reagan, 21 years old, lived in New Boston, Texas, with her husband Homer Hancock and their young daughter. Parker had taken their engagement and wedding photos professionally. She worked as a photographer, and that work had placed her inside Reagan's life in a way that felt entirely ordinary and safe. Reagan was pregnant too, genuinely, weeks away from delivering her second daughter. 2 women, both expecting, both sharing that particular kind of excitement that comes before a baby arrives. One of those pregnancies was simply further along in time. From the outside, nothing about this friendship looked unusual at all. Reagan had hired Parker for photography work, and that connection placed Parker inside Reagan's orbit without raising concern for anyone. As Parker's fabricated due date approached in the fall of 2020, the lie she had built no longer had anywhere left to hide. There is a specific kind of psychological collapse that happens when a sustained deception reaches the point where reality is finally supposed to catch up with it. A faked pregnancy can survive for months on performance. Announcements, photographs, a growing belly created through clothing and staging. The simple willingness of people who love you to believe what you tell them. But a due date is a different kind of deadline. A due date asks for a baby. And Taylor Parker did not have one to give. Prosecutors argued that what had begun as a deception within a relationship escalated into something far more violent, an attempt to produce a child she could pass off as her own, because the relationship she had built with Wade Griffin depended entirely on a baby that did not exist. What investigators and the documentary that later examined this case describe is not a single moment of impulsive panic, but a kind of psychological unraveling that had been building for months. A woman so deeply invested in maintaining the story she had told that the story itself had begun to consume every other consideration, including, ultimately, another person's life. The documentary Maternal Instinct frames the case as part true crime investigation and part psychological portrait, tracing how Parker's effort to maintain a false pregnancy ended in violence, and exploring how long a constructed identity can be sustained before it finally breaks under pressure. Reagan Simmons-Hancock did not know any of this was happening. She did not know that the woman who had photographed her wedding, who had built a friendly rapport with her over months, was approaching her own due date with absolutely nothing to show for the pregnancy she had spent the better part of a year describing to everyone in her life. On the morning of October 9, 2020, Taylor Parker went to Reagan's home in New Boston. What happened inside that house that morning was an act of extreme, premeditated violence. Court records establish that Parker attacked Reagan, inflicting more than 100 sharp force injuries. A medical examiner who testified at trial found that the cause of Reagan's death was homicide resulting from traumatic extraction from the uterus, combined with both sharp and blunt force injuries. The medical examiner also determined that the baby's death was a separate homicide, that some of the force used against Reagan had also struck the unborn child directly, and that trauma to the umbilical cord during the attack was consistent with it being pulled or compressed. I am not going to walk you through the physical details of that attack, beyond what is necessary to understand the case, because Reagan and her daughter deserve to be remembered as people, not as a catalog of injuries for entertainment. What matters for understanding this story is this: it was deliberate, it was sustained, and Reagan fought for her life with everything she had. Reagan's 3-year-old daughter was in the home during the attack. She was not physically harmed. She was, however, present for something no child should ever be present for, and the long-term toll of that morning on a little girl who lost her mother and her baby sister in the same hour is a part of this story that deserves to be held with real weight, even though it rarely receives the same attention as the crime itself. After the attack, Parker took the baby and fled toward Oklahoma. Less than half an hour after leaving the scene, she was stopped by a Texas state trooper for erratic driving near Kalb. She told the officer she had just given birth on the side of the road. The infant was not breathing. Both Parker and the baby were taken to the hospital in Idabel, Oklahoma, where Braxlynn Sage Hancock was pronounced dead. The medical examination that followed, the discovery that Parker had no uterus, the DNA confirmation that the baby was not hers, happened within hours. Investigators moved quickly. Parker was arrested that same day, October 9, 2020. Before we go any further, I want to pause for just a moment. This is one of the heaviest stories we have ever told on this channel, and I think it deserves a moment of real reflection rather than a rush forward. If you are still with us, and if this story is making you think about how far a person can go to protect a lie they have built, take 5 seconds and subscribe to Hidden Crime Stories. We bring you cases like this every week, told carefully, told honestly, and always centered on the people who deserve to be remembered. Let's continue, because what happened in that courtroom 2 years later showed the full weight of what was taken from Reagan's family. On December 11, 2020, a Bowie County grand jury formally indicted Parker for kidnapping and capital murder in the deaths of Simmons-Hancock and her unborn daughter. In January 2021, Bowie County District Attorney Jerry Rochelle announced he would seek the death penalty. In March 2021, Parker was indicted on a second count of capital murder for the death of Reagan's daughter. The trial that followed, beginning in September 2022, was extensive and exhaustive. Jurors heard from 142 witnesses over the course of 25 days. In her opening statement, Assistant District Attorney Kelly Crisp laid out for the jury the full scope of what prosecutors believed had happened, that Parker had a clear motive to kill Reagan, and that long before the murder itself, she had conducted a sophisticated and sustained scheme to convince her boyfriend and many others that she was pregnant, despite knowing this was medically impossible for her. The defense did not dispute that Parker had committed an act of violence. Instead, they focused on a specific legal question, arguing that the unborn child was not alive and breathing independently at the time of the attack, and that without that, the kidnapping charge that elevated this to capital murder should not apply, seeking an acquittal on those specific grounds. Parker's attorney also argued during the sentencing phase that Parker suffered from mental health issues that may have compromised her decision-making. The jury did not accept these arguments as sufficient to avoid the most serious possible verdict. On October 3, 2022, Taylor Parker was convicted of capital murder. The sentencing phase that followed was its own ordeal for Reagan's family, sitting through testimony, through legal argument, through the detailed accounting of everything that had been taken from them, in order to reach a final determination of consequence. On November 9, 2022, the jury unanimously recommended capital punishment, and the trial court sentenced Taylor Parker to death. The sentencing hearing gave Reagan's family the only opportunity the legal system could offer them, the chance to speak directly, in a room where it mattered, about what had been done to their daughter and granddaughter. Before the sentence was handed down, Reagan's mother stood and delivered her victim impact statement. She called Taylor Parker an evil piece of flesh demon and condemned her for murdering her daughter and cutting her body open to steal the baby she was carrying. It is impossible to read those words without feeling the full, unbearable weight of what that family had been carrying for 2 years by the time they finally had the chance to say them out loud, in front of the person responsible. Following her sentencing, Taylor Parker became the 7th woman on death row under Texas law, and the first woman in the state to receive a death sentence in 12 years, since Kimberly Cargill was sentenced to death in 2012 for the murder of her son's babysitter. That statistic matters, because it tells you something about how exceptionally severe and clear-cut a jury found this case to be. Death sentences for women in Texas are rare. Juries reserve that level of consequence for cases where premeditation, cruelty, and the absence of any mitigating explanation are found, collectively, to leave no room for a lesser outcome. The legal process did not end there. On November 6, 2025, Parker's first appeal was rejected by the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. On March 19, 2026, her counsel filed an appeal to the United States Supreme Court, arguing that she had not received a fair trial. On May 29, 2026, less than a month before this episode was produced, the Supreme Court denied that appeal. Taylor Parker remains on death row at the O'Daniel Unit in Gatesville, Texas, one of only a handful of women currently awaiting execution in the state. Her direct appeals are exhausted, though the case continues through habeas corpus review, and no execution date has yet been set. For Reagan's family, the legal conclusion of this case, even with every appeal denied, even with the harshest sentence Texas law allows, does not return what they lost. It never could. Before I share my final thoughts on this one, I want to talk to you directly for a moment. This case asks something different of all of us tonight. It is not a story to be entertained by. It is a story about a young mother and her daughter who deserved a long life, and about a community in New Boston, Texas, that has carried this loss for 6 years now. If this story affected you, please leave a comment and let me know what stayed with you most. If you believe Reagan and Braxlynn's story deserves to be heard by more people, please share this video. And as always, subscribe to Hidden Crime Stories so you don't miss the cases we cover with the same care every single week. Now, here's what I want you to carry from this one. I want to start by saying Reagan Simmons-Hancock's name one more time. She was 21 years old, she was a wife, she was already a mother to a little girl, and she was weeks away from welcoming a second daughter into the world. Her family sat through every single day of the trial that followed her death, and the loss of Reagan and Braxlynn has remained an open wound in the New Boston community ever since. She was not a supporting character in someone else's psychological unraveling. She was a young woman who hired a photographer she trusted, who was kind to that photographer, who had no idea that her own pregnancy, the most ordinary, hopeful thing in the world, had placed her in the path of something she could never have anticipated. I want to be honest about something else too. This story does not resolve into a simple, satisfying lesson the way some of the cases on this channel do. There is no clear warning sign that Reagan or anyone around her missed. She did not do anything wrong. She built an ordinary, professional friendship with someone, the way millions of people do every single day without consequence. The danger in this case did not announce itself through red flags in the relationship between Reagan and Taylor Parker. It came from somewhere else entirely, from a separate, hidden crisis inside Parker's own life that had nothing to do with Reagan at all, until the day it suddenly and violently did. That is, in its own way, the hardest and most important thing this case has to teach us. Not every danger in the world announces itself through a relationship gone wrong, or a partner who shows controlling behavior, or a stranger who feels off. Sometimes the danger comes from someone in a completely different kind of crisis. A person whose deception, desperation, or psychological unraveling has nothing visibly to do with you, until a deadline arrives that they cannot meet and they reach, in the worst possible way, for the nearest available solution. There was no way for Reagan to have seen this coming. I want to say that plainly, because true crime storytelling can sometimes drift, without meaning to, into implying that victims should have somehow protected themselves better. Reagan did nothing wrong. She trusted a person in her life the way reasonable people trust the people in their lives every day. What happened to her was not a failure of her judgment, it was the result of someone else's catastrophic choice. What we can take from this, instead, is something about how seriously we should treat sustained deception when we encounter it. Not in our friends or our photographers, but in ourselves and the people closest to us. Taylor Parker's deception did not begin as violence. It began as a lie told to protect a relationship. It grew, month over month, because the people around her continued to believe her, and because she could not find a way to tell the truth before the truth became impossible to produce. Lies of that scale, sustained, elaborate, built on faked medical evidence and staged celebrations, are a warning sign worth taking seriously, wherever we encounter them, long before they ever reach a breaking point like this one. Not because every lie ends in violence, they almost never do, but because a person capable of constructing and maintaining a deception of that magnitude is a person whose grip on what they are willing to do to protect that deception should never be assumed to have a ceiling. Reagan Simmons-Hancock and Braxlynn Hancock did not get to find that out in time. We tell their story so that their names are the ones that are remembered, not as details in a sensational case, but as a mother and a daughter who deserved so much more time than they were given. Rest in peace, Reagan and Braxlynn. You are not forgotten.